to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. All right, we're going to look at this for a little while this evening, and I ran across a verse this morning when I was reading in the book of Hebrews. We'll look at that when we'll add that into the list of things we'll look at. But we're going to deal with the civil authorities or the power, the subject that we need to be under as authority that was put there by God. And even the worst nation on the face of the earth, which I don't know which one it would be, I don't know. Years ago when he first came back from Iraq, or was it Iraq, and he said that actually the best kind of government Iraq had was under the fellow that was the one that everybody hated. And they said, because that's all those people understood was a thumper. Somebody had a large club and was willing to do what he had to do to keep the people in line. And so, Saddam Hussein was a bad dude. And he was ruler over a bad bunch of people. And of course, for whatever reason, public opinion turns on people when they're in government. And I think it's turning on the guy that's in there right now in our situation. And I'm kind of glad it's turning, although I don't cheer and rejoice in the fact that our nation is being led by, a bunch of people that seem like they don't know what they're doing, or they do know what they're doing and they're trying to destroy us from within. But I'm glad to see that at least somebody's challenging them, because government does need to be challenged. That's what the voting is all about. They need to be challenged about their behavior and what they're doing. Some of them make, six figures, and when they retire, they have sometimes nine figures in retirement. And so they become wealthy when they go into government. I don't know that our government was set up to be that way. Precedents for 2 months. It's been that way since. Although there was one fellow that was starting on his fourth. Roosevelt, right. Of course, he died shortly after. But let me just remind you that, it is an unusual thing to find a government that is a theocracy. What would that be? Well, that's a government that is run according to the Bible, according to God. Now, we do have some rules that come from the Bible our country has accepted, that almost every country has accepted. What's that? And the Clintons are proof of that, that you can get your name on a list and disappear. Forget what it's around 1,600 people that have disappeared from their ranks. So you cross too many lines with the government, and they can cause you to not be able to bake your cakes, cause you to not be able to have a church service, and they can close down your schools and your businesses, and they can do a lot of damage to us as people. To be controlled, not them. Now, they are, in fact, the ones that make the decisions. And so if they're making decisions contrary to what we like, they need to get out of there. And there is such a thing as impeachment for people that are doing things that are super illegal, even though they hold, quote unquote, an office. Someone said the president has the ability to. I'm not sure if that, I know he can pardon. And so if they happen to throw him behind bars, I guess he could pardon him or whatever. So maybe they're waiting until he can't do it. I don't know. But obviously there are people that should be behind bars that are not. And it seems like the government is protecting them. And then it seems like government is persecuting people who are nothing more than taught in school. Critical race theory is being taught in just about every public school in America. This idea of gender identification, things like that. Government was never supposed to be involved in that kind of stuff. That's not what they're there for. But they have overstepped their bounds, and we've let them do it. Anytime government makes another rule, you're losing some form of freedom. Anytime they sign another law, some form of your freedom is being infringed upon, especially if the law has nothing to do with a standing army. I mean, we need a standing army, but if you'll take notice, they're pushing for actually, they're pushing for an international police force. That's where you hear all this one world government stuff. They're excited about it. Trying to get everybody under one of, they call it protection. Did you ever take notice, read, well, we're to be peacekeepers in Ukraine, it usually means they got AR-15s and AR-15s and AR-16s and all the other different things they have out there. I don't think there is an AR-16, but they got all the peace equipment they need to shoot you if you don't obey. So keeping the peace, is something that government is supposed to be there for, so that we don't have to worry about millions of people crossing our border, invading us. That we're protected on our borders. I mean, think about it. If you think about it now, I'm just talking about civil government. That's one of the things that they should be doing, securing our borders. By the way, every nation has its national language. When I get on a telephone and call somewhere, the first language that they talk about is Spanish. I'm like, wait a minute. I call Spain or Mexico. We'll call somebody. If you want to hear it if you want to hear it in English, so you got to press 2. Spanish is 1, whatever that means. So I'm not here to just complain about government, but I'm here to tell you that we need to obey government everywhere we can, and then there's a place where we might have, no, that's through this morning, and I read this and preached on this passage many, many times, but in chapter 11 of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 11 and verse number 23, the Bible makes this statement, and it's an interesting statement because it's dealing with Moses, who led the children of Israel out of Egypt because Egypt was taken to the Israelites. They were actually slave laborers, working for little or nothing. Leeks and garlic. Here's what it says. By faith Moses, verse 23, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents because they saw he was a proper child. Now notice this next phrase, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. What was the commandment of the king? Well, if you know the story well enough, it was to kill all the male babies. Everyone that was killed. They were not afraid of the king's commandment. Under the king. And means he was drawn from water. And here he is. They're not going to pay any attention to the king's commandment. Why? Well, because God's commandment supersedes the king's commandment. And there's nowhere in the Bible where you ever find it legal right where in the Bible where you're to kill your baby. Now you say, well, did God ever kill any babies? Oh, yeah. There were babies that were taken, their lives were taken by the way of the King of the universe, the God who created life, has a right to take life. This week, my wife has been praying for a little baby that passed away, died. After a few months, I believe it was, struggled to live and then finally passed away. Abraham, when you were born, in that same room where you lived, a little baby died. And I remember seeing the mother hold him for the first time. And everybody in the room cried, including your mom and dad. So they watched that little baby die in the arms of his mom for the first time she held him. God has a right to take if he seems or deems necessary to do so. You remember he took David's baby that was born, of improper behavior by a king, as he took Bathsheba and had a child to her, and the child died. The Lord took the child's life. In some ways, it was probably best for the child. I don't even know how to say that, make it sound right, but imagine the child being, without really being truly given a dad's name, because his dad was killed on the battlefield. So it wasn't his daddy's child, and it would have been, an awful situation. Even Jesus was accused of being born of fornication in the scriptures. And many times, when children are born out of wedlock, and the Bible does say that, the wicked, many times have many more children, and they're born for the sword. Now, you can look at that any way you want to, but and is this much anymore? They may. I'm not sure that I know for a fact that they do, but they used to take their baby to the Ganges River and throw them in the river and give them to the crocodiles as an offering to God. Of course, it's not the God of the Bible. And so there is a time, and Moses' parents decided, we're not going to fear the commandment of the king. And I don't know, about this, but what if government decides they're going to come into our community here and decide that we can no longer have a church service inside these buildings because they feel that we are anti what they're promulgating as a government? And by the way, it's not very improbable to think that could happen. Matter of fact, it very well could happen in this country in which we live. We know that there have been people that have lost their livelihoods. Why? Because the government said you have to do thus and thus for the sodomite community. For that, all those LGBTQs, G's, Y's, and X's, I don't even know. I guess I need to memorize those. I don't know, but I know the ABCs. That took me forever to learn those. But to think that if you don't want to make a cake for a wedding for two men or two women, and you have a right to bake a cake for anybody you want to, or you say, I don't want to bake it. Correct? I would think you have the right to do that. Well, the government's saying, no, you don't have a right. See, the government now has taken away a lot of freedoms from us where they've said you have to do thus and thus because the government says you have to do it. And at what point are you going to just say, you know what? I don't care what the government says. I know what God says. And if I don't want to do something board that said because if you don't do it, you're going to get fired or you can't keep your job. And we lost hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of nurses and doctors, and even in the military it was butchered because of when they get zapped, whether they like it or not, pow, pow, they shoot you in the arm, and you're walking through like you're in a cattle type thing, where you're just walking through and they're letting you have it, But you're signing a contract that you now belong to the government as a government employee that has signed a contract for 2, 4, 8 years, whatever it is, military service that you decide to give them. Understand that contracts should not be broken. And I asked the military this, I asked him, I said, now answer me. They're trying to recruit people okay? And I said, well, if our government commands the military to begin shooting American citizens that are protesting something the government is, what would you do? Even without even a breath of thinking about it, he said, I wouldn't obey it. I said, wow, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. Because in Kent University back in the 60s, military actually shot protesters at a college. Now, I don't know all the ifs and ands and buts about all that either. All I know is that they were having lots of protests about the Vietnam War. And they shot and killed some university students. That's in the archives of our history. Okay? I recently, Texas. Anybody remember Wed Eve, Texas? Okay, the Davidian, the branch of the Davidians was down there, and there was a group of people, about almost 200 of them, most of them children, I understand. And the government, I actually thought the fence around that place was their fence. But the government put that fence around there so they couldn't get out. I'm like, whoa, I didn't know that. And then they obviously began to play loud music and things like that to try to drive them absolutely crazy. And if you watch that very carefully, you find out that our government sends in tanks, caves in the only exits they could get out of, and burns them alive in there. Kills a whole bunch of them. Not over a few that I understand escaped before the fences were up. But, you know, and I don't believe that those people believed correctly according to the scriptures. I would disagree with them in a lot of areas. We have a right to disagree in America. That's what freedom of speech is all about. We have the right to disagree. That particular outfit, that fella, bought every gun legally. He didn't have any illegal weapons. And they made it sound like he did. See, when you start talking about news and radio and television, see, that's one of the things that should keep us freer. That is the ability for us to know what's going on by way of people being able to independently submit what they know, what they see, what they've interviewed. And our government seems to have some sort of I'll call it a real hold on the news medias right now. It's almost like they're the ABC American news medias by the United States government. I'm really stand against stuff like that, and there's some obvious crazy stuff on there too. But at least you have a right to say, I'm not listening to that. That's crazy. Say, I know what the Bible says. I'm not going to let that mess me up. But if somebody's on there making some statement and they got some factual information about something that's going on, and then the government's trying to say, no, we never did that. And yet, people that we knew personally that received, 9 absentee ballots before the election. Why would they send somebody 9 absentee ballots? By the way, if the person told the truth, which I don't think they were lying, because they were Democrats themselves, and they received 3 absentee ballots and never asked for one. I don't know, did anybody get one in here, an absentee ballot? Anybody get an absentee ballot here? No? She got 3, yeah, she don't even vote. Yeah. So, you have to ask yourself, who's in charge of all this, say? And so there are people that report on that, and then they're smear campaigned, or they're shut down where they're not allowed to be on the social media sites, and they put them in social media jail. I've been put in jail a few times myself on the social media. And I'm sure there's some people out here have had it happen for a time or two. They don't keep you in real long sometimes. Because, but we have a nation who is trying to keep us afraid of the government. Like they are personally in charge of everything. Well, they're not. I'm here to tell you that God said, let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there's no power but of God, and the powers that be are ordained of God. But he never ordains wicked powers to crush people just out of the idea of having wicked powers in control. Matter of fact, if you study your Bible carefully, God destroys the wicked. He destroys the wicked leaders. And if you study out real carefully, you'll find out there's a man that led their country into the Red Sea to be drowned. Led their whole army there. Why? Because he was hard-hearted. And he hated the idea of letting Israel finally go. What did I do? I messed up. I let them characters go now. Let's go get them and let's finish them off. And didn't even notice they were crossing the Red Sea, where the Israelites went ahead on dry ground, and they had their wheels come off their chariots in the middle of the sea, and next thing you know, they drowned. Well, for the rulers are not, verse 3, a terror to good works, but to evil. If you think about some of the stories in the Bible that are most well known, for instance, Daniel chapter 6. What was Daniel's problem there? He was praying when he shouldn't have prayed to God. He should have prayed to the king or to the leader of the Babylonian. Listen, Daniel was 3 times a day. He didn't hide what he was doing. He went and prayed and ended up in where? The lion's den. Why? Because he didn't pay any attention to the king's commandment. He went ahead and just kept praying, just like he always prayed. I remember seeing pictures of people being arrested as they were on the Capitol steps praying, and they were being drug away, being arrested. I don't know whatever happened to them personally, but I thought it was not a very good to be in prayer and dragging them off the steps of the Capitol building. Well, rulers are not a terror to good works. They should be there to protect half of protection. Us that have been here long enough have been to some of our tent meetings or our outdoor meetings with our tabernacle. We have been, I guess, publicly assaulted by the local state police barracks. And they've actually walked into our meeting and told us to shut it off. Off, and the preacher's preaching away. And we, obviously didn't turn it off. We just kept on and came outside, and he had no invited to this meeting, and he goes like this. He points to his badge, his state police badge on his shoulder. I said, well, this is actually private property by the church, and we've invited people to hear the gospel. You're welcome to stick around and hear the gospel. Of course, the preacher's preaching away and really shouting and carrying on, He thought he could open us. Police officers came. Eventually, they realized we're having a church service, and they basically calmed him down, sent him to go get coffee and a donut. I guess I don't know what he did, but anyways, they protected us and let us have our church meetings, and even called me that will not happen again. But what happened? Okay, people in the town who don't like the gospel, don't want to hear the gospel, feel like we're infringing upon their right by preaching in the open air. Now, are we infringing upon the right? Do they have? No, they don't have to listen. Well, it was so loud that you couldn't go anywhere in your house. That's not true. That is not true, because my wife and I lived in that house right across the street. And if we were inside the house, you might hear, but you could tell what they were saying. If a motorcycle ran down the road and wide open like they used to, okay? And so it was just a matter of somebody fussed up, trying to get the law to do something against something that we have a right to do, and that is worship the Lord. That's one of our basic rights. Freedom of speech, freedom to worship according to our conscience. And by the way, Everyone has that freedom. I read somewhere where they had a Satanist church, had a great big multitude of people showed up to where it was at, but it was here in America. And they had the largest gathering ever, they said. Well, shame on anybody that would be that foolish to follow a Satanist church. But on the same court of freedom of speech, you have a right to believe the wrong thing. You have a right to reject the gospel. You have a right to not want to attend the church cars. You don't have to come here. You come here of your own volition. I don't think anybody's been hog-tied and handcuffed and drug in here. I remember years ago, Andy, they used to take and send people to churches like ours as kind of a punishment. They would make them come and they would have to, do what they called, they called a community service, where they would make them have to sit in a church service. And I thought that was pretty good. Send us some more. We'll preach as many as you'll send us. Well, that didn't last very long because it was cruel and unjust punishment to a fellow that made a living burglarizing houses and beating people up on a street corner. So he wasn't allowed to be cruelly disciplined, sit next to you crazy people listening to the gospel and shouting the song being sung. Hey, listen, the government has a right to punish evil. And there are punishments out there. Now, if anybody knows that forever for a move, it seems like a slow motion, and they move too quick, I was listening to an ad, you probably heard it yourself on the radio, where it says, don't resist. Talking about being arrested. Now, I don't know anybody here who's been arrested lately. Anybody here been arrested lately? I don't think so, but there's been people in here that have been arrested. I've been arrested. So I understand what it means to resist. To resist means you're opening yourself up for a man that's been taught how to stop resistance. Okay? He knows where to put the billy club if he has it in his hand. He knows where to put the taser if he's got to use that. He knows how to take your arm and twist it if he has to. So the best thing to do is agree with giving him your name and address and do what he tells you. And, let's deal with it. But people, feel like the police are the enemy. They're not the enemy. According to the Bible, verse 4 says he's the midst of God to thee for good, or for evil, or to good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. He's the minister of God. Sort of vein. Now remember, the 38s, millimeters and Glocks and all that stuff, they had the sword. And so if you disobeyed the sword, could be used against you. They would do a little bit of slicing. And then slicing wasn't as nice as it would be today. I think I said this the other day, I'll say it now. If you hadn't heard, in Washington, D.C., it's no longer a felony to take somebody. It's a misdemeanor as long as you don't injure the people that are in the car. You're fine. You can steal a car now. And that's bad. You shouldn't do that. You got to try buying your car, that kind of thing. So government has taken the position to squelch the speech of the conservative and Christian voice. Everything else has wide open. You hear filthy language everywhere now. It's everywhere. I used to like to listen to Sean Hannity, but he's got too many dirty words now. A lot of beeping going on in his whatever you call those things he does, podcasts or whatever. I used to like to listen to it, but it's all of a sudden, they're flexing their ability to use their speech, and I don't have to listen to it. I can turn to someone else, say. Now, should I shut him down? Well, no, but if enough people turn him off, he'll be shut down because they know who's listening and who isn't listening. Folks, listen, our government should be for good and protect good and well-behaved people. It should not be a problem for us to go further. It's going to be a problem the way, because if somebody were to come in here with the wrong kind of behavior, we don't speak well of it. What kind of behavior you're talking about? Sodomite behavior, homosexual behavior. The Bible is against it. It's an abomination to God. And if you know people are involved in those things, if you do address it, then it'll dress up the whole auditorium before it's over. You know, you have to set your bounds. I guess the Boy Scouts are no longer Boy Scouts. I don't know whether they did away with them now or not, but they were trying to allow girls in the Boy Scouts. I don't know if it's vice versa or not, but it's like, you know, when you go to a bathroom now and it's male, female, and then they have another insignia up there. What's that all about? Well, see, it's about government allowing things that are absurd and foolish to be protected, and that which is obviously God-given to be looked at as though, you're being a bully. You believe only boys can be boys. You're a bully. You're a bully is what you are. Girls can become boys. No, they can't. Even Mr. Rogers knew that back in the 60s. And he sings a song about it on the radio. You can actually bring it up on the internet. And he sings a song about boys will always be boys. You were born a boy, you'll always be a boy. If you're born a girl, you'll always be a girl. And girls will be the mommies, and boys can be the daddies. Than that. What do they even get involved in that? They need to worry about whether there's 5 million people crossing the border in Texas and Arizona and places like that. They need to be worried about whether or not our military is up to being able to defend us should another nation decide to on the shores of our land. I mean, there's a lot they can be doing. When it comes to commerce, did you realize that, Abraham, when you were saying you're having a hard time finding drugs? I think it was you who said there's a lot of drugs out there that are being hard to find. Now, he's talking about the stuff he has to take. Okay, he's not a druggie, but he's an official okay druggie, okay? He had a transplant, and so consequently, he has to take certain drugs. And they're becoming hard to find. You know why? Because China makes about 90% of our drugs. China. Think about that for a minute. So our government should be heavily involved in that. And by the way, the past administration was trying to change that so our own chemical places over here were producing the drugs we needed. When it comes to commerce, our government is involved in that. They need to be involved with, and by the way, the world needs each other. We need each other. Places like, well, I got to be careful what I say, you know. I'm trying to think what somebody supplies that we don't have, you know, that kind of thing, besides crazies. Anyways, there are places that make more pineapple than we do, okay? And so we get our pineapple from them. Wonderful. And what do we ship to them? Good question. They're not accepting Fords and Chevys anymore. So we'll send them what? Kias? Hondas? Toyota? I mean, when you think about it, see, our commerce has flipped around because the government no longer is doing what it should be doing with those things, and they're involving themselves in things like whether or not a parent has a right to stand in a school board setting and say, I want answers from this school board why my child was molested in a bathroom. And of course, they call them terrorists now. And the FBI and the CIA are being placed on alert that parents are terrorists because they voiced their opinion at a local school board meeting. I can't wait to see the barber tomorrow. I want to find out how he made out, because he was attending a meeting in Homer City where something bad was going on. They never even found out until after the kids started squealing on what was going on, and they were told not to say anything. Now, if our kids come to this school and we tell them not to say anything, there's something bad with that. What can't they talk about at home that we talk about here? I mean, government is not to be squelching free speech, but when you think about local school boards, being able to call on the FBI to come and do work against a parent that has stood up and verbally addressed that school board, I want to know. Most of them are women, by the way, mothers. When you get a mother mad, you better be ready like that's a bear, buddy. You got a bear on your hands now. You don't want to have a mother mad at you. I mean, dad may roll with a punch, but mom, she'll tear your eyes out, amen? And so these people are being told they cannot address us, or you'll be considered a terrorist. Well, according to this, he's a minister of God to thee for good, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, he beareth not the sword. He is a minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Now, let me stop. Moses' parents did not fear the commandment of the king. What did they do? They let their baby be born, and they raised him until he could no longer be hid. We have to hide to be able to discipline our children in America. Really? Someone asked, what's missing today that needs to be brought back that was a lot when you were a kid? And I said, spankings. Brother Jason preached on Sunday night. Spankings. Spankings. When we got spankings, things were a little different. Why? Because there was punishment for evil at home. Remember, that's the first place of authority, at home. Then the government picks up somewhere there in chapter 9 of Genesis, where it's not long after Noah's off the boat, the government's established. And I'm going to tell you something. Government was not established to eliminate the home. They really don't have a right to come in your house and tell you what you can or can't do when it comes to training your children with certain school board. If you want to train your child to be stupid, fine. You have the right to do that. If you want to train your child to be, a drag queen. Can you imagine going to a school board thing and having drag queens there? They're doing that in America. They're doing that at a lot of the public places around here where they play bingo. Hey, listen, it's not that people don't have a right to behave that way if they want to. They can. But there are some limits to morality. There's where your state, it's not a federal problem. It's a state and local problem. And local government has the right to say, no, we're not having that in our county, we're not having it in our cities. But what happens now, Philadelphia allows it, Pittsburgh allows it, Allen allows it. Well, I guess we just got to make everybody allow it. Well, it used to not be that way. There used to be places you could go to where it was called a dry community. What's that? A dry community. Well, it's obviously we're not talking about rain. We're talking about liquor. If Joe were here, he would tell you that probably 95% of all the people in prison have some form of liquor problems. Whiskey, beer, drunkenness, and misbehavior. There's not a football weekend or a sports weekend that don't go by where there's some outlandish, crazy fight take place either in the game or after the game with the people that are just all drunked up. Imagine getting your brains beat out because your team, made you so mad that you were going to yell obscenities at someone else's wife or something. And listen, people, they're angry nowadays. They're mad. They're out of control. And listen, state and local governments should have a right to say, you know what? Here's what we need to do. We need to shut that booze down in these games because all it's doing is creating just an atmosphere of danger. According to this, you must needs be subject. Wherefore you need to be subject, not only for wrath, okay? Not because you might go to jail, but also for conscience sake. You have any conscience at all about the things that God teaches. To be the Christian. We don't need to be lawbreakers. But we do need to have an absolute desire to obey God no matter what the government says. Daniel chapter 3, the 3 Hebrew children. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that was their names, given to them by the heathen people they were under control of. But why'd they go into the burning fiery furnace? What was going on that day? Was it something to do with music? Yeah, it was. Had something to do with music and worship. When the music played for the government and you didn't bow down, you were thrown into the fiery furnace. And so let's face it, if everybody's bowing, it's not hard to figure out who ain't, right? So here they are, 3 young men decide, you know what, we're not bound to that stupid music. We're not bound to that God. We're not bound to all this false worship. We're standing for God. Well, in the process of doing that, they ended up going to the fiery furnace. And actually, in both places, we see where officials actually realized they had made bad laws. They had made bad choices to make bad laws. When's the last time our government has said, you know what, we made it? Well, it's not too long ago. Roe versus Wade was overturned. But 60-some million children, almost 70 million children, already had been killed by that law that was made. I mean, do you think America is going to just dodge the judgment of God over that? I mean, a lot of what you see going on, I did or wanted to do it. You will see your nation make stupid laws. Makes laws that aren't. Now, the government actually overstepped its bounds, or perhaps decided they're just going to go conquer another land, that kind of thing. And God has a way of dealing with whole nations. All nations that forget God, said, shall be turned into hell. Now, you can say, I think we're in hell. You're not living in fire. Well, they might think they're living in hell, but I'll tell you what, their end life, they in fact live by the government laws that are made to justify turning against the God of the Bible. The history that we're being taught in America is being so rewritten. They're rewriting it all. They don't want you to know the truth that, yes, okay, let me just say this. Yes, slavery was bad. And we were involved in it up to our eyeballs. But to this day, slavery is still bad, and it's being done in many nations across. See, it's not a matter of whether or not we had it, but it's no longer the way we live anymore. We got a victory over it. And for the most part, we had a black president. We must be racist, right? Come on. The truth of the matter is, the problem isn't race, the problem is sin. Sin's not the only issue that keeps people from God, but religion keeps people from God. And so when you have religion that's being, I'm going to call it okayed or being justified by the government. For instance, you've ever heard of Sharia law? Sharia law? I might not be saying exactly right. That's Muslim law. They claim they have a theocracy. They claim they're operating their nation according to the God of the Quran. And so if you're a homosexual in Iran, they find a nice tall building to stand you on and say, "Oop, There you go. And they make sure everybody knows that's why they got pushed off the building. Oh, yes, and if a man, accuses his wife of adultery, she can be stoned. Rarely do they accuse the man, though. Think about that one. And if you get caught stealing, they cut your hand off. So if you see some guy with only one hand, you know what he did, right? Their laws, say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And after looking at that for many, many years as a preacher, I used to think, well, yeah, but what it's talking about, equal punishment according to the problem that was dealt with. There should be equal justice, I mean, let's face it, a lady crossing in between two places considered a jaywalker was recently arrested, handcuffed, and taken to jail. And in the same city where that happened, people were burglarizing houses and were in and out the same day. Why? Because the laws are no longer justified. They're being exploited because the person that was handcuffed was related to the lady that had been shot and killed in January 6th, so-called insurrection. I watched some of that on the news the other day. If that's what an insurrection looked like, it looked more like a carnival. And while they're running around propping their feet up on the legislator's desk and yelling, Nancy, where's Nancy? No any weapons. And there were police walking in amongst them all. I'm like, what's with this? And they're going to jail. And people that are lying and doing things in government that are causing our nation to have food shortages, gas shortages. It's just, so what? It's the new norm. The new norm. Well, the Bible says, wherefore we must needs be subject, not only for wrath, okay? They have a right to justifyly put you behind bars, but also for conscience sake. And a Christian should have a conscience that's guided by Scriptures. We're to do to them as we would have them do, right? That's the golden rule everybody talks about. How many people follow that? Then it says this, for this cause pay ye tribute. Now, that's why you're paying taxes. That you have a government that's good, punishes evil. A government that's fair and honest with its people. Its leaders are not there to make a fortune. As a matter of fact, if every one of those men had what they would call, limits of being able to be in office, you wouldn't see all the powerful people in Washington that you have there. I mean, if you think about it, Mr. Biden's been a politician for almost, 50 years now. 50 years. Because there were no limits on some of the offices he held. And 50 years, crooked politicians. And have you noticed who has money seems to win the election? What's with that? See, that even has a stink to it to me. You have to raise more money than the other guy so you can put some filthy evidence out there that have no truth to them. Because the other places won't let him put his ads out. It's crazy. But the Bible says that's why you're paying taxes. So you have lights on your streets. Not as many potholes. Right. And so you have, a police force that's there to protect you. Now, by the way, if you think that having firearms is illegal, don't argue with me about it, okay? That's your privilege. You don't have to have a firearm. We do. And ours are loaded. My wife even learned how to shoot it. She's probably a better shot than I am. And even though we're not advertising we'll kill you if you come in my house, but if you come in my house trying to hurt us, we'll kill you. And we have a right to do so. And I can show it from the Scriptures where when people even were burgled, had the right to actually take their life. I can't believe my son would go to jail just for burglarizing. Some lady said that right on the news. They're God's ministers attending continually upon this very thing. This is what they should do. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. And I can tell you right now, you ought to fear God always. Government, there are times. If you're, listen, if you're the kind of a person that's out there doing some kind of shaky business, trying to sell weapons to our enemies, or trying to exchange, secrets for different things that would make our nation, less safe, we have every right to put you behind bars and even execute you if you're that kind of a person. And our country should not. I've never seen a country as foolish as ours has gotten to be spending so much money on trivial, foolish little things. And then the big things are like, it'll come out in the wash. Yeah, right. It'll come out in the wash, all right. Well, if you're going to render the dues to who they belong, okay, do you pray for our president? Yeah, I pray God saves him. I pray every day God saves him. And I call it our wicked leadership. I mean, all liars have their part in the lake of fire. If he can get away with all those lies, then God's a liar. And God's not a liar. All liars will have their part in the lake of fire. And all the people that are wicked behind him and in front of him and leading him or doing him, listen, they're all in the same boat. My grandmother used to say, birds of a feather flock together, right? That's how it usually is, too. Show me your friends and I'll show you who you are. Show me your comrades and I'll show you who you are. This outfit we have in here right now, can you imagine hiring somebody to be a leader in one of the departments that he's considered a cabinet member, and the guy's still in luggage at an airport? Well, they finally fired him after about twice doing that publicly, and the guy's an absolute, I guess he's a whoever, whatever. I don't think he knows what he is or what he should be. We live in a country that really has wasted many, many years trying to find ways to shut down conservative Christian speech, conservative Christian theology, and things that teach us morality. I mean, morals they come from the Bible, folks. You don't just make these up. Gambling's considered legal. I mean, in one city, I'm trying to think of the name of the city, it doesn't matter, prostitution's legal too. And, every city in America now, gambling has taken over. On paycheck day, let's say all the old timers will get their checks sometime this week. And I'm not going to kid you about this. Go to any place that sells lottery tickets, and they'll be sitting out in their car, and they'll have a whole pile of them. All their extra finances they have on lottery tickets, and then saying we don't have any food. Really? And the government's saying, gamble responsibly. If you're going to get drunk, don't drive. If you're going to buzz drive, get somebody to drive for you. That's a whole new line of Uber drivers after midnight, guys. We live in a society that has taken government not for what it's supposed to be doing, but doing what it's not supposed to be doing and making life miserable for the average American. I thought about Russia. Not everybody's for what Putin's doing. He's had over 100, well, no, I think 300,000 casualties for a war he started. Imagine all the mothers and the wives and the children. I mean, the families that have been 300,000. See, and one leader made that decision. We're going to go and we're going to take that property. It's ours now. You know, and here the rest of the world's sending a missile here and a couple tanks here and an airplane or two here. And you say, why is it? It's about money. It's almost always about money. People are feeding money to these things. And who's suffering? Little guys like you and me. Little fellows like you and us. I mean, our children join the military, right? Because they want to be patriotic. And then our government makes some kind of rule or law or sends them somewhere where we have really no reason to even be involved in that. We live in a day where Jesus could come at any moment. He said it would be wars and rumors of wars. He said there would be places. I mean, he said that evil men would wax worse and worse. And if they be governed or won't govern themselves, they need to be governed. So this is necessary even in the world in which we live. I mean, Andy, if we didn't have any police, could you imagine what this thing would be like? If we didn't have any police right now at all. And it doesn't mean there's not bad police officers out there. Sure there are, but they're not all bad. Is there any bad doctors out there? Sure. But when just about every other billboard is a lawyer, a lawyer is about every other billboard. Jesus said, woe unto you lawyers. See, the people that are practicing law, really what they're doing, they're practicing loopholes. They're practicing ways to get around the law or to circumvent the law. You know, if you were a lawyer, and they have, actually, I've gone into a witness and pitched, shoot, I don't know how many people, it's quite a few. And they a hearing that jurisdiction because he wouldn't get a fair trial because everybody in that area knew him and knew what he did. And so they had to move the venue to a place where it would be neutral, where he'd have a fair trial when they got video of him killing people. As far as I know, he's still alive, still in jail, and chances are he'll never have to pay the price that those people he killed did. Well, government has to be controlled. So that's why we say, you know, it's not wrong for Christians to be in government, but boy, it's a tough place to be. I don't know if there's any real Christians in government or not. I know there's some that claim to be. Rand Paul from Kentucky claims to be a Christian. You know, I like a guy that wants to know the truth. The Bible tells us that we are to be subject to the government, but not when it overrides God. We have to be like Moses' parents, not be afraid of the king's commandment, and be willing to stand our ground or stand in a cell. History has proven that Christians have had to go to jail in order for their quote-unquote truth to finally win out. Praise God. I'm glad I got saved. Amen. Nobody knows. I'm glad I got saved. Amen. What a life you can live for Jesus. And it's not without trouble. It's certainly not a bowl of cherries. But it's the best life. The least amount of, if you're looking for a life with the least amount of pressure, it ain't the Christian life. Because we're like the salmon that's swimming upstream. We're going against the flow. We're not what most people want. But those of us that are saved say, I want this till Jesus comes. I want to stand my ground. Hold the fort, for I am coming.